And this is where I want to come to tonight, inshallah ta'ala, before we go into the next lecture about the end of times. Where in the world did Zionism come from? How does Israel come into the picture here? How did we lose something so fortified, something so precious, something that was so monumental and a model for the world, and how to thrive with your history while adjusting to your circumstances? Once again, you find the decline of Muslim unity. Once the Muslim Ummah starts to fall apart from within, then our enemies will always find the fault lines and take advantage of them. You know, subhanAllah, I was thinking about a very early conversation. When you look at the wars between Ali radiallahu ta'ala and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and the Roman emperor reaches out to Muawiyah and says, hey, listen, I can deliver Ali's head to you. We can jump in on this battle and we can fight Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu together. And Muawiyah says, you stay out of this. I'll deliver your head to Ali radiallahu anhu. This isn't your business. That yes, there are internal schisms, and sometimes those schisms can grow and can become deeply self-defeating for us as Muslims, but don't ever leave room for your enemy to exploit your weakness and to come in and to take you when you are in the state. And so with Dawla al-Uthmaniyya, the Ottoman Empire starts to weaken, starts to fall apart due to internal corruption, undoubtedly, due to internal division, due to external interference, the advent of European colonialism, pillaging the Muslim world, feasting on those exploitations. Western colonial powers like Britain and France slowly starting to stick their noses and stick their feet into Jerusalem and what it may be in the time that is coming. And a strategic, secular, atheist movement known as Zionism that starts working from the 1800s to retake Palestine or to establish a secular, atheist military state. No matter who would live or dwell within. And some of you might be surprised that I'm calling it a secular, atheist state because Zionism is and was a secular, atheist, militant atheist project, a nationalist project, an ethno-supremacist project that actually at its root did not begin as a religious movement, was merely one expression of a colonial movement towards the Muslim world to divide and pillage and take from the Muslim world that was looked at as an open playground to the West in this regard. And a lot of Muslims don't recognize that Zionism started off as an expressive anti-religious movement, because we see the images today of religious zealots marching into Al-Aqsa and citing the Talmud and citing the Torah and calling us the children of darkness and themselves the children of light, and using all sorts of twisted texts to carry out the most barbaric practices. And you have to go back and see, how did we lose this in the first place? How did this happen? And so we go back to the origins of Zionism. And it's always important to focus on the thinkers and to focus on the figures, because those are the things that you will be able to remember, even as you lose sight of the dates and as you lose sight of some of the broader political contexts. A man by the name of Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was an Austro-Hungarian atheist, Jewish journalist, and political activist. He was a self-avowed secular who is considered the founder of modern Zionism. And he's the one that starts to propose or starts to cement and define this idea of a Jewish state, of a home for the Jewish people, especially in light of the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and in the West. And we should, as Muslims, absolutely claim our history and say that while Jewish communities thrived not only in Palestine, by the way, there were Palestinian Jews, it's a historical fact, thrived not only in Palestine, but where would you find historic Jewish communities in the West that were able to survive the various political trends there, whereas you have historic Jewish communities in Yemen, in Morocco, in Iraq, and beyond that had their rights protected. Yes, infringements happen, but that's something that as Muslims we look to and we say, that's our history. We have a history. Europe has its crimes. And as Europe carries out its multiple pogroms and crimes against the Jewish people, likewise you have Theodor Herzel, who seeks to reformulate Judaism not as a religious covenant, but as a racialized identity. Hence, you can be secular, atheist, but still Jewish. It's a racialized identity. He seeks to formulate the idea, as the founders of Zionism formulate the idea, that the Jews are united by a racial identity, not by a religious covenant. That it's not by their abiding by the Torah, rather it is by lineage and political identity, and that is their distinctive trait, not their commitment to Judaism. What makes this so interesting is that the first people to rise up against such an idea were the rabbis of the time. Orthodox Jews, rabbis, found this to be a preposterous idea. That you formulate a Jewish identity that is racialized, separated from any type of religious commitment or covenant. And by the way, when I say it was expressive, Herzel said that he would be content with any political state where the Jews in the racialized sense could have self-determination. And so these ideas of a Zionist state were put forward. It could have been in Uganda. It could have been in Argentina. It could have been in Kenya. Even Sinai, where they're trying to push us out to now, that was proposed as a location. And yes, of course, locations in the United States and other places were proposed as places where the Zionist project could take its hold. And amongst the places that were proposed were Palestine, were Palestine. Not because of a religious commitment, but because it would be politically convenient and ideal to tie the identity of the Jewish people to the historical place of Bani Israel and to form some sort of a link between a European ethno-state called Israel and Bani Israel that exists in the books. Somehow a racialized identity that privileges a people and allows them to expel the indigenous of that land and enjoy supremacy as Europe continues its crimes. And so Europe is not responsible for its reparations or for what it has done. You're not talking about the restoration of the rights of Jews in Germany. You're talking about the mass migration of Jews in the racialized sense to Philistine, to Palestine, and the expulsion of the people of that land in the name of safeguarding the Jews, which is an absolutely preposterous idea and one that was rejected at the time and should be rejected by any moral voice even till today. So he envisions this as a political and national entity rather than a religious one. It's actually, there's a saying that you don't believe in God, but you somehow believe that God promised you this land. And so it was common to find an atheist that still claimed the land on the basis of now a historical connection, a religious connection that God had supposedly forged between them. And they saw, the founders of the Zionist project, they saw religious voices as an obstacle, not as allies to the cause that they were putting forward. And so Palestine is chosen for political and colonial reasons, not for religious reasons. Most rabbis called it a rebellion against God. And you can read, subhanAllah, some of the works. Rabbi Shalom Bershnierson, who said, their plan to gather the Jewish people together with their own power will never be. And all their strength, their many strategies and efforts will not work or have any success against the will of God. Whoever twists the meaning of the Torah and finds proofs to Zionism from the Torah, and especially from the hidden Torah, is like the one who places an idol in the temple. May God in His great mercy remove this accursed doctrine from among the Jewish people and inspire their hearts to repent to Him in truth. Avraham Karelitz, a revered rabbi, wrote the only actual difference between the formation of the Zionist state is that before this they were hoodlums without a military, and now the hoodlums have a military. Theodor Herzel himself, he wrote that we shall prevent any theocratic tendencies from coming to the fore on the part of our priesthood We shall keep our priests within the confines of their temples. So what he envisioned of a state of Israel was supposed to be a secular one. The religious voices are rejecting it because you are rebelling against the decree of God, because the scripture explicitly states that you can't have a mass migration before the Messianic period. All of that is thrown out the window, and suddenly we have a situation where militant, secular atheists are joining with hands with European colonialists and slowly expelling the people from the lands of Al-Aqsa and from the lands of Palestine. By the way, David Ben-Gurion, who of course the airport is named after, the first prime minister of Israel, he himself used to take pride in being a pure secular. He was known to eat pork, to not abide by Yom Kippur, to never set foot in synagogues. His biographers would say he openly questioned the belief in God as a whole, somehow on the basis of religious supremacy. These are the people that are brought from Europe. And Muslims and Christians and indigenous people are expelled from their lands. And so how do we look at this from the European colonial power and what happened here? And I don't want to get too far into detail because we'll extend it into the last lecture. Herzel recognizes that Zionism cannot succeed without the support of what he calls a great power. And so he basically says that you have to pitch Zionism to a great power that can get behind it so that it can form part of a defensive wall for Europe and Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism, against the barbarity of the Arab and Muslim world. So specifically, he's proposing, let's traffic in the way that the European colonialists are framing the Muslim world as barbarians and as wicked and evil people, and pitch this to the European colonialists to take the project of Zionism on and say that this will form as an imperialist base for you in the Muslim world. And it starts to sound very familiar. At the start of World War I, the Zionists attempted to persuade the British government of the benefits of sponsoring the Jewish colony in Palestine, a Zionist state in Palestine. And so who do they lobby first? The Rothschild family. And so through lobbying efforts, so familiar, subhanAllah, through lobbying efforts, they're able to get the Rothschild family to buy into the establishment of the state in historic Palestine. And hence you have the 1917 Balfour Declaration. 1919. In the US, there was a commission that was formed to explore the possibility of Zionism, or what it was looking at in terms of the establishment of a state in historic Palestine. And the King Crane Commission wrote that the initial claim often submitted by Zionist representatives that they have a right to Palestine based on occupation of 2,000 years ago can barely be seriously considered. And so you would have to considerably modify or reduce your version of the Zionist program in order to put forth the idea that Palestine is the location of this Jewish national home. And they proposed that it could be a Jewish national home, but not a Jewish state. And so the initial ideas were the emphasis of Jewish immigration to a protected Jewish national home in Palestine that then becomes a Jewish supremacist state named Israel imposed on the people of Palestine. And this is how you start to see the formulation of the supremacy of Zionism coming forth. Britain and France supporting Zionism to advance their own imperial interests, and Britain helping Zionist militias to actively clear out the area and to make room for further European adventure in this part of the world. SubhanAllah, one of the great thinkers of our time at Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, rahimahullah ta'ala, visits Gaza in 1964. And he wrote an essay that you can look up called Zionist Logic. And he views Zionism for what it is at the time. And he says the number one weapon of 20th century imperialism is Zionist dollarism. And one of the main bases for this weapon is Zionist Israel. The ever-scheming European imperialists wisely placed Israel where she could geographically divide the Arab world, infiltrate, and sow the seed of dissension among African leaders, and also divide the Africans against the Asians. Zionist Israel's occupation of Arab Palestine has forced the Arab world to waste billions of precious dollars on armaments, making it impossible for these newly independent Arab nations to concentrate on strengthening the economies of their people and elevating their living standards. And the continued low standard of living in the Arab world has been skillfully used by Zionist propagandists to make it appear to the Africans that the Arab leaders are not intellectually or technically qualified to lift the living standard of their people, thus indirectly inducing Africans to turn away from the Arabs and towards the Israelis for teachers and technical assistance. In other words, they cripple the bird's wing and then condemn it for not flying as fast as they. And he says that to American blacks and Muslims, that both suffer due to Zionist colonialism and American dollarism, and that fighting these two evils would serve both purposes. And so as you see, the Polish terrorist, whose fake name is Benjamin Netanyahu, a Polish terrorist standing next to a morally bankrupt realtor, talking about the removal of a people and the purchase of a land and the expulsion, because this would open up doors. Know that this is recycled rhetoric, and it is exactly what Malcolm calls imperialism and dollarism meeting together. A marriage of evils, where the people are looked at as less than and removed from their historic places. And Malcolm, subhanAllah, saw that the placement of Palestine between the Arab world and Africa made it specifically a strategic place for imperialists, to have an imperial outpost in this part of the world, to serve its colonial interests. And the word transfer was used in Zionist literature of the non-Jewish population, which means ethnic cleansing is at the heart of Zionism, and there was never any such thing as Zionism without ethnic cleansing. So if anyone tries to redeem a strain of Zionism and tell you that it's not inherently ethno-supremacist, show me one Zionist leader or pioneer that didn't advocate for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. It doesn't exist. Every strain of it required the removal of the people for the placement of another people, which is illegal by any moral standard. To end here, when does Zionism turn religious? So it's only after 1967 that Zionism starts to take on a more religious framework. That religious language starts to find itself within Zionism, and that you start to find more biblical references being used. And this, of course, allows for religious extremists, Jewish religious extremists, right, functioning within their version of Zionism, to find a marriage partner in Christian religious Zionists in the United States, both of whom want to forge a messianic era, but for different purposes. Right? Religious Christian, I can't make this up. I was once on a panel with a rabbi and a pastor, and the pastor was an evangelical, and he was talking about, we see the development of Israel as the heart of Christianity and what we do. And the rabbi said, and I'm not making this up, he said, yeah, so you could kill us. It's a marriage of convenience that throws every moral standard out of the window and allows for the continued expulsion of a people. And it was again in the 1960s that religion starts to become infused more into the Zionist project, and Zionism, which was a secular atheistic movement, becomes more religious in its outpost. And that's where you start to see now these crazy right-wingers that are forcing themselves through the barricades of Masjid Al-Aqsa and putting forth this idea of the reconstruction of the third temple as the heart of their mission. And this is where we are today. Conspiracies, efforts, impacts. I've been asked in the last year about the red heifer conspiracy. The idea of a red cow. Sounds silly, but these extremists actually believe that al-Baqarah al-Hamra, that a red heifer has to be born in order for there to be a ceremonial cleansing that would allow for the reconstruction of the third temple. And guess what they've been doing? Just like they genetically modified the illegal state of Israel, they're trying to genetically modify a red cow. Where from? Texas. And so there is an institute in Texas where you've had 5 red heifers that were sent to Israel in 2023, right? Because they're trying to breed the perfect red cow. These crazy religious zealots are trying to breed the perfect red cow, which would supposedly open the doors for the next temple. On top of that, obviously, you have the idea of the Greater Israel Project, where Zionism is inherently expansionist. And it shows that it's not just about Palestine, it's also about Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and Iraq and Egypt and beyond. And it will not stop because it's an expansionist ideology that doesn't know when to stop itself. And now you can hear these extremists openly talking about the expanse of these borders. And that has always been the case in everything that has taken place. And so now you have this idea of the third temple and the establishment of the third temple where Masjid Al-Aqsa is. I want to leave you with 2 thoughts here. Number 1, وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. If they find a red baqarah, it will not change anything of the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in what we know of what will come of the liberation of that place, bidnillahi ta'ala. May Allah allow it to happen in our lifetime. Allahumma ameen. So it doesn't matter what trees they plant, it doesn't matter what cows they breed, it doesn't matter what temples they construct, it doesn't matter what scriptures they forge, it doesn't matter what political parties they put forth, it doesn't matter what they put forward. وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not allow this to succeed. Allah Azza wa Jalla will not allow this project to succeed. But at the same time, I want you to heed the words of Malcolm. The end of his essay was called The Messiah, in quotation marks. And he says, if the religious claim of the Zionists is true, that they were to be led to the promised land by their Messiah, and Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine is the fulfillment of that prophecy, where is their Messiah upon whom their prophets said would get the credit for leading them there? It was Ralph Bunche, the UN mediator, who negotiated the Zionists into possession of occupied Palestine. Is Ralph Bunche the Messiah of Zionism? And if Ralph Bunche is not their Messiah, and their Messiah has not yet come, then what are they doing in Palestine ahead of their Messiah? Did the Zionists have the legal or moral right to invade Arab Palestine, uproot its citizens from their homes, and seize all Arab property for themselves, just based on the religious claim that their forefathers lived there thousands of years ago? Only 1,000 years ago, the Moors lived in Spain. Would this give the Moors of today the legal and moral right to invade the Iberian Peninsula, drive out its Spanish citizens, and then set up a new Moroccan nation where Spain used to be, as the European Zionists have done to our Arab brothers and sisters in Palestine? In short, the Zionist argument to justify Israel's present occupation of Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history, not even in their own religion. Where is their Messiah? We have to equip ourselves to push back on these arguments, to debunk them on the basis of history, to debunk them on the basis of religion, to say that you have a claim based upon your religious text. What gives you the right to privilege your religious text over my religious text? Where else do we do that? Or do you want to make the claim that whoever ruled the longest should have it? Well, then the Ottomans should have it. Or do you want to make the claim that whoever was there first should have it? Well, then you'd have to go pre-Bani Israel, and they should have it. What basis do you have for the expulsion of the people of that land? And subhanAllah, we have a history of a millennium of how we treated people in that land. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to restore justice to that land. The justice that was found in Islam for the people of that land, that doesn't tolerate oppression or the humiliation of people and the desecration of the sanctified sites. Allahumma ameen. You know, I was thinking about the Wailing Wall. That is where, if you think about the way that structures were preserved for different religious communities, that is where we believe that the Buraq was tied. Where is the spirit of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu when he walked out of the church because he said, this church belongs to the Christians, I don't want Muslims to claim it for them? Where's the spirit of the Muslims that didn't destroy anything or take things away from people? Where is the spirit of justice that we find in ourselves. And so it's important to say as well that Muslims never denied a Jewish connection, but we do push back on Jewish supremacy in that land on the basis of a biblical claim that allows for now indigenous Muslim and Christian Palestinians to be robbed of their historical homeland. The last scene I'll give you is this. I ended off Salah ad-Din with a scene of Henri Gouraud, the French colonialist, who walks into Syria in the year 1920, and he kicks the grave of Salah ad-Din and says, "Get up, we're back." And there is almost, subhanAllah, a parallel scene of Edmund Allenby entering, the British colonialists in the year 1917, entering the city of Jerusalem and claiming that the British had a mandate to take Jerusalem and to give it to another people. And they called it what? What was the motto of Zionism? A land without a people for a people without a land. Meaning we are not a people. Talk about dehumanization. The hundreds of thousands of people that were driven out of their homes in the Nakba were not people. They never saw us as people. But when a British colonialist walks into Al-Quds and a French colonialist walks into Syria and they kick the grave of Salah ad-Din, or they enter with their boots into Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, know that you can complain about the humiliation all you want. But until you rekindle in your heart and in your efforts what drove Salah ad-Din in the first place, we remain in a state of humiliation because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who controls the dynamics of power at all times. My great-grandfather, Mufti Munib Hashim, rahimahullah ta'ala, who was the last Ottoman-appointed Mufti of Palestine and Nablus, the one line I read in his biography that made my heart fill with love and glory was that he wouldn't stand up for the British when they would enter. He remained seated. He wouldn't honor them by standing up for them. That somehow, as time goes on, we start to adopt norms of humiliation for ourselves, and we start to adopt these things as mainstream and acceptable. Wallahi, even if they let us go pray in Masjid Al-Aqsa without the harassment, until it is free, the Muslim's heart should be shackled with pain. And every single one of us should be dedicated, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be a part of its liberation. Allahumma ameen. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, next week will be the final lecture in the series, and we'll talk about Al-Aqsa in the end times. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be with our brothers and sisters as they are suffering, and to grant them full victory. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to see in this Ramadan the victory that has been promised. Allahumma ameen. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.